Henry isn't just soap opera. He's also one of the most important and original monarchs ever to have sat on the throne of England.
Henry VIII can best be described as a young man as a golden prince.
For most of his life, Henry VIII was obsessed with control. He controlled the English court, the nobility, the church, and even the most intimate details of succession and legacy. His health was treated as a matter of national security, because in Tudor England, the body of the king and the body of the state were considered inseparable. To Henry and to those around him, the health of the monarch was the health of England itself. That obsession did not end with his reign. Henry was equally determined to control how history would remember him. 2 decades before his death, Henry began planning what he intended to be the most magnificent royal tomb England had ever seen. It was not meant to rival earlier monarchs. It was meant to surpass them entirely. His final resting place would be larger, richer, and more elaborate than anything that had come before. It would declare his power long after his death. That is not what happened. When archaeologists and officials accidentally rediscovered Henry VIII's burial vault beneath St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, what they found was not grandeur, but neglect, not triumph, but decay. And the condition of the tomb stunned everyone who saw it. Henry VIII died in 1547, enormously powerful and enormously ill. By the end of his life, he suffered from chronic infections, severe obesity, and open-leg ulcers that caused constant pain and emitted a foul odor. His physical decline was widely known and politically sensitive. Yet even as his body failed him, his ambition for immortality through monument only grew stronger. The origin of that ambition can be traced to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. In 1524, at the height of his power, Wolsey commissioned an extravagant tomb for himself, designed by the Italian Renaissance sculptor Benedetto da Rovezzano. The materials were among the finest available in Europe: rare marble, black touchstone, and gilded bronze. When Wolsey fell from favor in 1529, Henry seized everything he owned, including the unfinished tomb. Henry examined the design and rejected it as inadequate. He ordered a new plan, one that would eclipse not only Wolsey's vision, but even the tomb of his own father, Henry VII, in Westminster Abbey. The new monument was to be at least 25% larger. It would feature white marble pillars, massive bronze candlesticks 9 feet tall, and life-sized gilded figures of Henry and his third wife, Jane Seymour, placed atop a monumental sarcophagus. There were plans for statues of prophets, apostles, and evangelists, more than 100 figures in total, arranged beneath a triumphal arch with Henry himself mounted on horseback. An entire chapel within St. George's was to be dedicated solely to Henry's memory. Daily masses would be said for his soul. Nothing about the design was modest. It was intended to be overwhelming. Work on the tomb began in earnest around 1530. Sculptors cast Henry's life-size effigy in bronze. Marble bases and pillars were carved. Decorative elements were completed and stored in workshops at Westminster, awaiting final assembly. But reality intervened. Henry's wars with France and Scotland drained the royal treasury faster than it could be replenished. Military campaigns took precedence over monumental architecture. Benedetto da Rovezzano, aging and ill, eventually returned to Italy. The tomb was never assembled. When Henry died, he left instructions in his will. His burial beneath St. George's Chapel was to be temporary. Once the magnificent tomb was completed, his body and Jane Seymour's would be transferred to a specially constructed chapel housing the finished monument. Henry believed the project was nearly done. It was not. His children had other priorities. None were willing to spend vast sums completing their father's vanity project. Over time, the components of the tomb were sold off, repurposed, or lost. The massive sarcophagus was eventually used for Admiral Lord Nelson in St. Paul's Cathedral. Bronze candlesticks were shipped as far as Belgium. The gilded effigy of Henry himself was melted down for its metal. Instead of eternal magnificence, Henry received a cramped underground vault. Beneath the choir floor of St. George's Chapel, his massive lead coffin was placed beside that of Jane Seymour. The space was small, unadorned, and unmarked. There was no grand monument overhead, no inscription visible to the public. Over time, even the precise location of the vault faded from memory. For more than a century, the vault remained undisturbed. Then history intervened again with bitter irony. In 1649, King Charles I was executed after the English Civil War. The new Commonwealth government, led by Oliver Cromwell, wanted the burial to be quiet, unceremonious, and inaccessible to royalist sympathizers. Windsor Castle, isolated and tightly controlled, was chosen. Workers searched beneath St. George's Chapel until they rediscovered Henry VIII's forgotten vault. Henry, who had spent his life trying to prevent a Scottish dynasty from ever ruling England, was now about to share his grave with a Stuart king. Charles I's heavy lid coffin was maneuvered into the cramped vault and placed beside Henry's. In the confined space, the coffins may have been bumped, shifted, or handled roughly. No one was concerned with preserving Henry's dignity. The priority was speed and secrecy. The vault was sealed again. In the late 17th century, it was opened once more to accommodate the stillborn child of Queen Anne, whose small coffin was placed atop the others. After that, the vault was sealed, seemingly for the final time. There was no marker above it. Visitors walked across the choir floor for generations without realizing they were standing above the remains of one of England's most famous kings. By the early 19th century, even royal officials had only vague records suggesting Henry was buried somewhere beneath the choir. Then in 1813, construction workers repairing the chapel floor broke through into a hollow space below. The discovery caused immediate alarm. The Prince Regent, the future George IV, rushed to Windsor. Officials, physicians, and clergy gathered as lanterns were lowered into the dark, airless vault that had not been opened in more than 160 years. What they saw was deeply unsettling. 3 large lead coffins lay inside the cramped chamber, along with the small coffin of Queen Anne's child. Jane Seymour's coffin was intact. Charles III's coffin was undisturbed. Henry VIII's coffin was not. The wooden supports beneath Henry's coffin had collapsed completely. The massive lead casing had fallen at an angle, smashing into the stone floor. The impact had split the lead along its seams, tearing open the coffin. Portions of the wooden outer shell had splintered and broken away. The coffin of England's most powerful king lay cracked, exposed, and badly damaged. There was no attempt to open it. The condition alone was enough to shock those present. Sir Henry Halford, the physician who documented the examination, described the scene in careful detail. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A king who had demanded absolute control, who had planned the grandest tomb in English history, lay forgotten in a broken coffin beneath an unmarked floor. The vault was resealed. Decades later, in 1888, a surveyor named Alfred Young Nutt was granted rare permission to descend into the vault and document it. His watercolors remain the only detailed visual record. They confirmed what earlier witnesses had described. Henry's coffin lay shattered in the center. The damage was extensive. The lead had split at multiple seams. The wooden casing had failed entirely. Nutt concluded that the destruction was likely caused by internal pressure. Despite the best embalming techniques of the 16th century, Henry's body decomposed. Gases built up inside the sealed lead coffin over years and decades. Henry's immense size only worsened the effect. Eventually, the pressure became too great. The lead expanded, weakened, and failed. When the supports collapsed, gravity finished the process. There is also evidence that the damage may have begun earlier. Contemporary accounts from Henry's funeral procession describe foul fluids leaking from the coffin during an overnight stop. Dogs were reportedly seen licking the residue. If true, the coffin may have already begun to rupture long before it reached Windsor. Whatever the exact cause, the outcome was the same. Henry VIII, the king who reshaped England, who broke from Rome, who married 6 times and executed 2 queens, ended his days not in splendor, but in neglect. His magnificent tomb was never built. His burial site was forgotten. His coffin lay broken in darkness for centuries. Today, a simple marble slab marks the spot, though modern research suggests it may not even lie directly above the vault. Tourists walk past it without stopping. Guides mention it briefly, if at all. Just a few steps away stand elaborate monuments to far less consequential monarchs. Henry VIII tried to control everything in life. In death, he controlled nothing. The vault remains sealed. Modern technology could examine it without disturbance. Ground-penetrating radar, imaging, even DNA analysis. But there has been no official effort to do so. Church and royal authorities have shown no interest in reopening the grave. Perhaps that is fitting. The broken coffin beneath St. George's Chapel tells a story no monument ever could. It is a reminder that power fades, ambition fails, and legacy is ultimately shaped not by those who demand it, but by time itself.